Welcome everybody. In this segment, we're going to be illustrating something with pen and ink and some watercolor. So number one, we take a sketch, any sketch we have. Here I have a landscape with a barn, and I'm going to take a ultrafine Sharpie here, nothing special, and I'm going to outline my line work that I established in pencil. So as I go through this process, I can put in some little gems of textures that I didn't initially put in with the sketch, such as some of the roof textures of the shingles. And I can use some hatching there to start illustrating the boards on my old barn here. So you're going to see a lot of verticals and horizontal lines used here. Defining the space. Also taking a look at sense of like light. So if I'm basing this off a photograph, I'm darkening some areas, doing a thicker line here as opposed to a thinner line there based on my lighting. Depending on the details and textures you're adding, your line work would be different than mine, but I'm establishing everything that I feel needs to be outlined for this illustration. So bear in mind that this is permanent ink, so whatever you put down stays. So if you're unsure about an area when you're drawing it, do a little less, and then you could always put more in later. Some of these little scribbles for the grass there. What I'm going to do next on this barn is I'm going to add some shading with hatching and fills to create the effect of shadow and enhance my lighting. This will bring out details and add some more three-dimensional depth and form to my subject, helping some of those boards separate. And now I'll move on to the rest of the landscape. So if I'm doing grass, I'm doing a lot of loose, different length lines, moving here and there in vertical fashions. For stuff in the background, very simple outlining for like a tree line and a little mountain ridge. I'm going to do some small trees and branches. Sorry about my hand being in the way there. But again, if something's far away, details are minimal. I'm going to, and as my grass gets closer or lower in the scene, you're going to notice that the grass gets taller and larger. That helps create the sense of space. I also have some clouds in my illustration here that you can see them lightly penciled in. I'm definitely not sure if I want to ink those, so I'm going to leave them as is. I'm going to see when I get to watercolor, I'll see if the watercolor is enough for that detail. So again, putting in the details I feel need to be in, but I can always add more later. Feel pretty good about that. So on to layering some watercolor. So in here, we're going to talk about some patience and some other important steps. You'll see I have my watercolor paper taped down on a board. Very important to tape it down so it doesn't buckle very easily. I have my watercolor set, Sharpie pen if I need it, and a couple different size brushes. And super important, a cup of water and a paper towel when I need to dry some things out, especially the brush. So I'm going to take my brush here. I'm going to wet it. I always like to wet my watercolor brush first before I get started. And I'm going to start on the color of my barn. So I'm going to test out a color. I have a palette attached here. So I'm going to take a little bit of brown, work it in with my wet brush, and I'm getting a pretty transparent brown there. But I do want it a little lighter, so I'm going to grab a little bit more water from my cup and thin out that pigment. I like that. So I'm going to get started with a light fill. You'll notice it's not a heavy brown. I want this to look weathered, so a really deep brown would not do the job here. It's always good to test out your colors so you're comfortable with them. And always err on the side of lighter than darker if you're not quite sure how intense you want to go. So now it's interacting with the with the um, uh, with the materials of the pen. It's doing a nice job. Now, when I'm thinking about the roof here, I don't know if I want to go orange or red. So I'm going to get a scrap piece of paper and test out some variations. I'm just mixing some orange and red together, trying different variations. And I think that's the one I want. Remember, water thins a color, and if you use more pigment on it, it's going to make it more intense. So the more paint you use opposed to water will make the color more intense. So I'm bringing in a soft orange there. I'm going to bring a little bit there. That helps separate the roof from the wall there. Now that's a little darker there, so I'm going to take my brown again and add a little bit of purple to it. Purple will make a brown like darker and grayer. And watch this when I put this in here, how much it helps and enhances that shadow of the side of the barn. I'm going to also put that in some other key areas. I feel like there should be some big drop shadows to help intensify. And I also like it for the rest of my barn. So I'm also going to go and paint some of the boards in with that darker gray and leaving some that old lighter brown. And I'm going to get this very weathered old barn feel by having different types of weathered wood board. I really like how that's coming out. I'm emphasizing some of my shading I did with my ink pen by getting a little bit darker in those areas with my tone as well. Okay, now onto the grass in the field. It's going to be kind of a springy type of field, so I'm going to put some water down first to wet it. It's going to help my colors bleed together better. I'm going to grab some yellow, add it directly on there, and just wash it around, which means like wipe it around in the wet area. Take a little bit of bluish green, a little bit of green and blue. I'm going to dash that. I'm just testing my greens out there. I'm going to dash a little in there. You can see I'm tentative, which means I'm not going too intense just yet. A little bit more yellow mixing with the green. It's creating some soft greens. A little bit of orange in there. Maybe even a little bit of brown to kind of accentuate some of like some dirt in the field. Because the watercolor paper is wet by my brush earlier, when I dab these around, they're going to just blend together very nicely to create a lot of variety in the landscape here. Just using green would make it look like a rug, you know, like it would look like a turf field or something. I didn't want that. Now, so we talked about applying water first to create a wet effect. So I'm going to do that. Moving on now onto my sky. I wanted to create soft clouds. So here's how you can create some soft clouds. Take a brush, wet the area. In my case, it's the sky thoroughly. You'll know it's wet thoroughly if you tilt the paper and you can see it shine back at you in all those areas. That means that paper is saturated. Take your time with this. Once you get there, I'm going to create a kind of a mid-tone blue. I'm going to take actually a little bit of black and blue and a little bit of purple. Creates kind of a stormy blue. I'm just going to wash some in there. Kind of wiping it in there where I feel like I want to create a cloud pattern. And as you put it into a wet area, the colors start to mingle and bleed and blend together. You create these great effects of like how sky really looks. It's got soft fades. So a little bit of that black and purple is going to enhance my cloud texture. And remember, the watercolor paper is white, and that's going to be the brightest white you can achieve on the watercolor. I know you might have white watercolor on your palette. Try not to use that. You want to use the white of the paper here. And how do you use the white? You avoid it. You avoid putting color in certain areas so you get those bright spots pop up. So I'm just softening around. I can even lift out with a paper towel to pull some of the wet watercolor out to kind of unleash that white of the paper more. And again, just kind of dancing it around. And if I'm doing a sky, I'm definitely brushing left to right, right to left. I'm not really brushing up and down. This is helping me get some soft atmospheric textures. This would be really good for water too and other effects such as mountains in the distance. Adding a little purple here for a little extra variety and depth. It's like an overcast kind of day here. So again, lift out when you need to. Especially if you make a mistake and you put too much color somewhere, lift out quickly with some paper towel to get rid of most of the color. Now, because now you can see how I'm tilting that, you see the shine of that. That means that area is very wet. So what that means is I have these mountains to put in. If I put them in now, I'm going to get some bleeding happening. If I wait 5 minutes, I can get a really clean edge with my mountains. It depends on what texture you want to get. So watch me put this in against the edge of that Sharpie, like on the mountain edge, and you're going to see it start to bleed up against the sky, past the outlines of the Sharpie. I'm okay with that because it creates a very soft, like, background look. But if I wanted to have a really clean edge, like my roof against the sky, I'm going to want to make sure I have a dry air paper in that area, so things aren't getting all muddy when they drift together. Just applying some browns and greens and purples and blues here to create a darker patch of landscape there. And there we go. Create an illustration using some techniques where you have the paper wet first to create soft blends, and then you're just drawing with the paintbrush for some smaller, tighter areas. Try it out, practice, and good luck, everybody.